criminology is a function of intent by the government. In other words, you can be selling all the drugs you want over there. I'm selling a little bit of weed. But if the government says we targeting weed, then you can get away with what you're doing all day long. For example, the federal government has never targeted high-level white drug dealers. They have never targeted high-level white drug dealers. They may target high-level Mexican. They might target high-level Colombian. They've never targeted high-level white drug dealers because they know who brings the drugs in. They need drugs in America. Drugs are necessary for the American economy to operate because so many of your Fortune 500 companies smuggle drug money in order to support the worth of their stock because the banking industry is dependent on it. They funnel the money. Insurance companies funnel it. Your 401k, the retirement pensions, all of them make use of smuggled drug money in order to support the worth of their stocks. Without the drug economy, the American economy would crash. I learned while studying psychology in graduate school that white men have consistently had the highest rate of suicide in this country. Middle-aged, rich white men lead the country in suicide. Elderly black women are the lowest risk for suicide. I would argue because of their spiritual foundation. Black people are a spiritual people. Black women are the epitome of spirituality because she's the first human being that God created to send life through. So I believe it is our spirituality, despite slavery, despite Reconstruction, despite Willie Lynch, despite Jim Crow, despite civil rights, despite Black power, despite the crack, despite the Obama neglect, despite the Joe Biden hypocrisy, our faith as a people has insulated us from the thought of taking one's life as a result of not being able to cope with one's emotional pain. No disrespect to the European community. They can be religious too, but they do not have the spiritual strength or foundation of the original man and the original woman. I think Europeans are at a significant disadvantage when it comes to establishing a relationship with supreme consciousness because, number one, their culture is not rooted in connection with God. They come from a very objective, a very Eurocentric scientific approach to reality that says if I can't see it, if I can't measure it, if I can't manipulate it, if I can't control it, it must not exist. So if we look at white psychology doesn't even admit the existence of spirit. Sigmund Freud, although the father of European psychology, he came the closest to establishing the belief that there is a spirit that dwells within the man, but he was rejected when the behavioral revolution came, and they said that he was basically a heretic for dealing in concepts that had no scientific basis. So white psychology doesn't admit the existence of spirit. So here's the question. If a white man is suicidal and white psychology doesn't admit the existence of spirit, when he goes for treatment to deal with his suicide, and if there is in fact a soul within us, how is he ever going to overcome the emotional pain that he's suffering from if the therapist working with him won't even admit that there's something greater that is motivating his life from within him? With Black people, when we go to therapy, we tell the therapist we have a spirit. It ain't a question to be debated. We have a spirit. So therapy is about reconnecting you to that essence. White psychology don't even admit it exists. So if you're a white person suffering trauma and you haven't grew up in a home or a community with a strong religious or spiritual basis, what intervention can be had for that type of person to stop them from committing the ultimate mistake? I believe it is the materialistic nature of European society, the anti-spiritual nature of European society, the narcissistic nature of European society that measures success by material growth, that has all these white men and girls judging their life success based on what they earn and what they own. That is a recipe for death and destruction. And we also see a similar parallel with Chinese college-age students who, if they don't get accepted into Harvard, into Yale, into Princeton, into some of these elite universities, they take their life because they feel that they failed the family, because after all, my mother and father sacrificed their entire life to put me in this position, and I didn't score high enough on the tests. So whether we're dealing with, now the Asians do have a pretty strong spiritual foundation, but in the modern world, in their pursuit to conquer the European, I think they have become just as materialistic as the European, and as a result, their mental health has declined just as much. So even if you look recently, a couple of these recent mass shootings have been Asians, you understand? And to that point, the white man and the yellow man are forming a coalition, at least on this soil, to combat the black man. 89% of the interracial marriages that have taken place in the past decade have been white to Asian. The Asians are the group that the white power structure has adopted as probationary whites to increase their numbers and push back against black people. Is there an ancestral curse against Europeans in America? You follow? When I look at that type of suicide, when I look at the type of mental illness that I see against European people in general, when I look at the medical issues, don't get me wrong, we have them too, but many of our medical issues are induced by the society in which we live due to poor food and poor medical care. They don't have to worry about that, but yet they're suffering. Look at the decline in their numbers. I mean, white people have been going out of their way as a government to reduce the numbers of black people in this country at least since the 1970s. AIDS, poor nutrition, black on black crime, police genocide. Exactly. But yet, half of the states have a zero white birth growth rate. More white people are dying and being born in 25 states while you're going out of your way to get rid of blacks. I think there might be an ancestral curse due to slavery. But black people can't get comfortable with that. See, I'm very careful when I bring up things of a spiritual nature, because as a race of people, we're always looking for an excuse to not do nothing. And that's one of my issues with the black church. The black church gives us some very clever excuses to sit around and not do nothing. We have to be agents of change. We can't sit around waiting for spiritual and cosmological intervention, because no people who ever got free because the angels came and fought for them. You see, so black people have to make sure we live in this reality. Although we may be inspired by what goes on the spiritual side of reality, we can make our decisions based on that. We have to make our decisions based on the real world in which we live. And any intervention we're going to get from the ancestors or from God or from the spirits, let it come when it comes. But you can't make your decisions based on that. I'm not saying a woman should want to share her man. I would never want to share my wife. But when you look at the community and what is in the best interest of black people, when you look at all these children without fathers, when you look at these women who are on the lower end of the socioeconomic ladder with 7 or 8 kids that they can barely raise, how do you not consider putting an able-bodied married man in that house to stabilize that system and provide nurture for those children? If we care about the future of black children, if we truly care about the future of black children, how do we not address the fact that 70% of them are being raised by single mothers?
There seems to be a humongous elephant in the room in regards to the black community, thing called molestation, right? We're in denial about it. We don't want to acknowledge it.
Absolutely. I've been in the mental health field since 18. When I started undergrad, I started working with children. That's 30 years. In 30 years, 99.9% of every homosexual black male I met, every lesbian black woman I met, few exceptions, 99%, they were all molested as children. And 99% of them were molested before the age of 12. I could almost predict it. I did my pre-doctoral internship in Trenton, New Jersey. I worked with sexual predators, children. I didn't meet one of these sexual predators who was not a victim of predatory behavior themselves. You follow? You see the R. Kelly situation. What do we know about his history? He was abused and molested. You follow? So it's a vicious cycle. Why don't we hear more about that? You know why? It contradicts the agenda of LGBTQ. Remember now, LGBTQ rests on a foundation that says this lifestyle is normal and it is healthy. That means if you connect this lifestyle to child pathology, can this lifestyle still be considered as normal and healthy? Let's go back to the American Psychiatric Association. When they took homosexuality out of the DSM, this was in the early 70s. If you read the position paper, it's on the internet. We have no proof that people are born gay. They say it. We didn't do this because we found scientific evidence that people are born this way. We did it because their activists have been fighting and forcing us to normalize this behavior. It was because of the political pressure of the gay activists. It had nothing to do with scientific evidence. Even now, the American Psychological Association tells you there's no proof that people are born this way. You follow what I'm saying? Politically, the reason why the government pushed the LGBTQ, because remember the Stonewall riots that gave birth to the gay revolution in New York City took place a few years, right? 69. King was murdered in 68. Stonewall 69. The government did not wait to eclipse the black agenda with another agenda. And the beauty of putting the gay agenda out front, you do two things. Not only do you crush the black agenda, you recruit gay blacks into the white LGBT movement. So it looked like black people needs are still being catered to, but only in gay face. And number three, since most homosexuals are white, by making homosexuality a minority issue, all you're doing is taking money from this white man and resources from this white man and giving it to this white man. Homosexuality is the greatest scam ran by the power structure because it has privileged white people falsely posing as a minority group that's disenfranchised.
But like, is there anything realistically that can be done to minimize molestation? Because man, it's just like, yeah, these kids are destroyed and it seems like it's hard for them to bounce back from it.
Oh, it's very hard for them to bounce back. But here's why they can't bounce back. The time between trauma and treatment can be 40 years. If you got molested at 8 and you're going to see a therapist for the first time at 48, you see what I'm saying? The core beliefs that that trauma gave birth to in your consciousness, how are we going to get them out? You've been operating on those for 40 years. We can get them out, but it might take 40 years to get rid of them. You follow me? So one of the issues is the time between trauma and treatment. If we got them right after they got touched, we could save them all. But if you ain't getting them till 20, 30 years after they've been molested, you can still save them, but it's going to be much tougher. The number one risk factor for somebody becoming a child sex abuser is having been abused themselves. You know what the second risk is? Emotional abuse and abandonment. Let me tell you what I learned at my pre-doc. I learned that when a child is emotionally abused and abandoned, they have no body. They need somebody. For a while, they use their toys, but the toys can't talk back, can't hug back, can't love back. So guess what? If I'm used to being abused and abandoned, right? Nobody has ever really spent time with me, poured into me. My mom is too into her career, my father into his new wife. I need somebody to love me like I love them, right? So my victim has to be somebody who can't do what? Refuse my advances. I can't afford any more rejection. I can't afford any more abandonment. So I got to find a victim who can reciprocate, but who is totally under my control. That's why the 12-year-old gets the 5-year-old. That's why the 15-year-old gets the 8-year-old, because they are too young to say no. They are too young to go tell. They are too young to resist intimidation. And this is why child sex abuse begins in childhood. I had a debate with a brother who I respect. He's a nationalist like me, but we disagree on homosexuality and child sex abuse. We both disagree with it, right? But how we should handle it is where we disagree. He feels we should kill all the homosexuals and kill all of the sexual predators. And my response to him was simply this. Most homosexuals begin as children. Most child sex predators begin as children. Are you telling me that you're perfectly okay with killing 11-year-olds the minute you find out that he touched his 5-year-old sister? Are you perfectly okay with killing 10-year-olds once you find out he's having thoughts of same-sex relationship? I'm not about killing children. I'm about healing children. So although we both disagree with homosexuality and pedophilia, we don't agree on the solution. He says kill them all. I say that's not a solution, not just because of murder, but guess what? If he's already touching his sister, what does that mean? We already failed him. If that boy is already having thoughts of being gay, we already failed him. So for me, the best intervention is prevention. Make sure what? Make sure black children get the love, the attention, and the protection that they need as children. Now I'm gonna loop this back to our polygyny conversation. If we know that homosexuals and pedophiles are born out of a dysfunctional, emotionally unavailable family environment, and 70% of black children are being raised by a single mother doing the best she can, working multiple jobs to care for them children. If you don't put a black man in them homes, there may be things going on in that house that gives rise to pedophilia and homosexuality later in life. So if we are really trying to stop the rise of gay black men, and if we are really trying to stop the rise of pedophilia in the black family, how do we not give those women? How do we not allow those women to participate in a plural marriage family? What do we hate more, plural marriage or pedophilia? Do you feel me? Because plural marriage can very well be the answer for a lot of that pedophilia. If the man is in the house, you can best believe molestation ain't taking place as much as it's taking now. Look at the homes our kids live in. The mother got to work. Welfare cut. So the kids are raising themselves.